Buzzcast.
Welcome to the next edition of Buzzcast. I'm Peter Tapling. I chair the Payments Innovation Alliance Quantum in Payments project team, and we'd like to introduce you to the team and the work that we're doing. With me today to have this conversation are John Brady, Brian Dao, and John Buselli. And let me allow them to introduce themselves. John Brady.
Yeah, thanks. My name's John Brady. I'm the chief architect at Bilgo. Bilgo provides a strategic bill pay platform that simplifies the process of paying and processing bills. We make it easier for billers and merchants to receive payments. We also have the largest network of small to medium-sized billers. I have pretty much worked in payments and banking technology my entire career, and I'm super excited about how quantum is going to affect payments and banking going forward.
Excellent. Thank you. Mr. Dao.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Dao, and I'm EPCOR, a payments association, and we really focus on advocacy, education, training, and advising in the payment space.
Excellent. Thank you. And John Buselli.
My name is John Buselli. I'm an offering manager here in the IBM Research Organization. I am involved deeply in our quantum computing initiative, both on the quantum side as well as the subject of today in terms of how quantum can be used or the issues associated with quantum safety in the market space, and look forward to today's conversation.
Excellent. And yes, so I'm Peter Tapling. I chair the Quantum and Payments project team here for the Alliance. Of course, quantum computing is one of these things where we say, wow, that sounds cool. That's like, somewhere out by Saturn and Jupiter, right? And so when we try and take quantum computing and tie it to payments, it's kind of first important to understand what is quantum computing and how does it change the way we need to think of computing. So John, being with IBM Research and having worked in quantum for a better part of a decade, I'm pretty sure, can you give us a bit of a primer just on quantum computing generally?
Absolutely. And Peter, I think your point about looking to demystify this for the audience is really important. So at its heart, quantum computing is a new paradigm of computation, as well as information science that's all predicated on the fundamentals of quantum mechanics. As it turns out, nature is actually a very interesting and complicated place. And at its fundamental atomic level, there are some very unique properties of nature that we essentially harness using quantum techniques and quantum methods to generate a new potential method of quantum computing. And to demystify this a bit, I'll use an analogy. The best way I can describe quantum computing is the difference between a light switch and a dimmer switch. A light switch, on, off, 0, 1, represents classical computing as we understand it today. We've used this technology for generations, and it's served us very, very well. It's either 0 or 1, on, off, A, B. And again, that model has served us very, very well. And we can imagine how computing has taken advantage of that through a series of gates and methods to actually perform computational processing. Now imagine a dimmer switch. It can either be 0 or 1 or any possible value in between. And if I were to define the difference between a byte and a qubit, the fundamental element of quantum computing, it's perhaps best represented in that difference. Where a light switch is either 0 or 1, on or off, a qubit can be on or off or any other potential value in between. And at its heart, this process is what enables us to harness the incredible power of nature for what really is the next generation of potential computing. Now, as it turns out, at a microscopic, at a subatomic level, nature has some really, really, really interesting properties. The first that I've just described, this light switch versus dimmer switch, is subject of superposition. The idea that nature allows atomic particles to be in many places at once kind of defies logic, but as it turns out, it's really true. And we can harness this power and leverage it so that we can do extraordinary amounts of more computation in a small space. and that's the subject of superpositioning. The next subject is called entanglement. And this is an even more interesting, if not bizarre, principle in nature. And that is the fact that two atomic particles can actually be aware of each other's position while they're not physically connected. This is the notion of entanglement. It's sort of like networking in a computer perspective that we think of it in today's parlance. But as it turns out, if I measure 1 qubit, I can understand the position or the value of another qubit without directly having an interrelationship between them. This adds to the potential computing power of a quantum machine. And the last is what we call interference, right? Imagine you drop 2 stones into a pond and the waves start moving towards each other. Some cancel each other out, some accentuate each other. Quantum processing is essentially a probabilistic process. It's not discrete like classical computing because of the fact that I have many dimensions or values at the same time. What I really want to be able to do is to accentuate the most likely answer. And this process or this feature of interference allows me to minimize the ones that are not adding value and accentuate the ones that are adding value. That process, combined with entanglement and superposition, gives us extraordinarily new computational power using quantum processors. Now, quantum is on the horizon. We're getting to the point where quantum computing is becoming useful. We've been at this, the industry's been at this for almost 50 years, so this is not new. But we're coming to the point over the next maybe 5 to 7 years where the power that I've described, the capabilities that I've described, are potentially going to unleash a whole new array of capabilities into the market space. These might be around material science. Quantum computers are extraordinarily good at modeling nature, which is essentially what a quantum machine does. And from that, we can derive all kinds of value for chemistry and biological science, for example. It's really good at optimization problems, right? The traveling salesman or portfolio management or payment optimization methods, right? It's really, really good at that kind of stuff. One of the other things that a quantum machine can do relative to classical computing is factor large numbers. The reason this is important is the basis of a great deal of modern cryptography relies on the fact that it's really hard to factor large numbers. Quantum machines, along with some of the most well-known algorithms designed for quantum computers, can reduce that time from hundreds of thousands of years down to days, if not hours. And that's why we're so concerned about the negative impact of quantum computing. And that's really part of our discussion topic today. Now, the final point I want to make about quantum for this particular audience is to recognize that quantum machines will never work by themselves. They're going to require classical computers to work with them. So your monitor, your laptop, your keyboard, your spreadsheet, your business applications are still going to exist. The way a quantum machine is going to work is by taking a piece of a problem that it does well. The mathematical processes that quantum machines do extraordinarily well, faster and potentially better than classical computers, will be working in concert with classical computers. And it's this new hybrid model of computing that's on the horizon. And that's what makes this such an exciting and interesting time to be in the business. Peter, that's my introduction to quantum and the value for today's conversation. I'll turn it back to you.
All right. Wow. So quantum computing can solve some subset of really, really hard problems way faster than we can do today, right? That's kind of the summary, and that's the hook that we used when we created the project team. So what we want to do now, and what we did in the project team, by the way, is we've actually come out with our first deliverable. We have a white paper on quantum computing and the effect on payments. It's available today. You can go to the alliance.notcha.org site and find it freely available. And so I want to take that introduction that Mr. Buselli gave us. And John Brady, you mentioned you've been in banking for a long time, been in payments for a long time. the paper that we wrote focused a lot on the characteristics of quantum that create threats in the payment ecosystem. So put a little lens on that. How are, in this exercise that we've gone through, how have you begun to think of quantum computing and where it fits in your day job?
Sure, yeah. There's a couple of things here. First of all, I'm really interested in how we can leverage quantum computing in the future to solve really complex problems that go beyond the capabilities of traditional computers today. So within the payment space, things like how do we improve fraud detection? How do we improve AML detection? Those are, I think some problems that that we could apply quantum computing technology to help us improve those things. I'm particularly interested in how we can use quantum computing to best optimize payment network routing in real time in order to prove that process. But as we also talked about, there are some threats. So quantum is a bit of a double-edged sword, and the particular threat that we're concerned about is using quantum computing to break current encryption algorithms that are used across the industry, including within payments. So as you know, cryptography is involved in pretty much every step in the payment process, either with data at rest or data in transit. And so when you look at cryptography, it's present, when you're making a payment, if you look at how a payment flows through the network, through the various payment networks, there's a person or a business originating the payment, either on a website or using a card or something like that. There's data that they have that needs to be encrypted. There's data that they're sending that needs to be encrypted. There's the originating FI that's involved in the payment process. There's the receiving FI that's involved in the payment process. And then there's the business or person that's receiving the payment. So every step along the way, there's a need for cryptography and for protecting the payment information and for protecting the person's identity. And so for every one of these steps, they need to be evaluated for quantum readiness. So, also I want to point out that many of these steps are going to be performed by payment networks and technology suppliers. So, when I think about what do fintechs and FIs need to do in terms of preparing for quantum safe encryption now, I believe there's several steps there. So I think it starts with our internal policy. So when I, here representing fintech, one of the things that we're doing now is we're looking at our policies. How do our policies need to be updated? How do banking and payment regulators need to look at this in terms of expecting fintechs and banks to be prepared? So, I think it starts with our encryption policies, our policies around how we protect data, how we protect consumers' data, how do we protect the payment data, and how we protect the banking data. The other thing that I think needs to happen here is companies will need to create a program team to start looking at identifying and inventorying data stores and data connections that have highly sensitive data. So we need to look internally at our own systems, our own data stores, where we put payment data, where we put PII data. We also need to understand any impacts of our suppliers in the payment space. We need to look at directly technology providers. We need to look at technology that we provide. We need to look at the payment networks. Pretty much anybody involved in the payments in processing a payment. So. Earlier this year, NIST did publish a set of algorithms that are resistant to post-quantum cryptography. One of the things that we're doing now as a fintech organization is looking at our encryption suppliers to determine how do those need to evolve? How can those recommendations be applied against the encryption that we have? And then also, how can we look at our suppliers to evaluate our suppliers to understand how they're applying those recommendations as well. So those are some of the key steps that I see in terms of how it affects fintechs and FIs going forward.
Excellent, thank you. And put a little time horizon on this. 15, 20 years ago, quantum computing was theoretical. People thought we might be able to do it. Fast forward to today, and I believe we now have computers that operate at 1,500 qubits, John, or something like that. But they're truly capable But they're not really commercially viable just yet, meaning they're not easily accessible. And so in the industry around quantum, we have a phrase we came up with called Y2Q, the year in which quantum computing becomes commercially viable and commercially acceptable enough that it does create this threat that John Brady spoke to. John, anything to add?
Yeah, Peter, if I could just comment. Quantum computers are generally available, either from companies like IBM and others in the market, typically in the cloud. These capabilities are there, and there have been billions of algorithms and programs run on quantum machines. I think the issue is that they're still, I'll call them immature. In other words, while there's an increasing amount of power, there's still not quite enough to distinguish between classical and quantum computing. But we're getting very, very close to crossing that threshold, where there'll be enough qubits and enough confidence or error-corrected qubits where we'll do workloads that are very distinguishing and very different than what can be done on a classical computer. And we are now right at that precipice. And if we look out over the next 5 to 7 years, that's only going to accelerate, moving us into an era of quantum computing. So we're really not that far away at this juncture.
Yeah, and I think Y2Q isn't a hard date like Y2K was, but it's a floating date. It's kind of the next 3 to 7 years. Anyway, so Brian Dao, you agreed to join the Alliance Quantum team, and when I asked you to do this, you said, "I know absolutely nothing about quantum." So talk to us about your experience and what you've learned at going through the Alliance team and how you're going to bring it back to your members.
Yeah, so first off, I want to thank John Buselli for the bits and qubits analogy. It's different than the one in the white paper, and it was a literal and metaphorical light switch for me just now. So I really do appreciate that. And for the rest of you, I've just been brought in as a quantum novice. So for those of you who are still watching up until this point and are still confused, don't be alarmed. I'm right there with you. As a payments association, EPCOR has over 1,700 members. And so I wanted to take the approach that my members would take and enter this conversation just like them, with minimal research and minimal knowledge. I told myself I wouldn't Google anything before this conversation. The only resource I would use was the white paper that we're referencing, and we'll link to it. And after reading it, I have way more questions than answers, and maybe a couple takeaways too, and I'll get there. But I suppose that's expected for something that has yet to come, right? It feels like Y2K all over again, but in this case, we're calling it Y2Q. Especially how the paper uses is coming at the decade's end, which means to me, December 31st, 2029, we just entered 2025. So officially, we have less than 4 years to figure everything out if you're outside looking in. So even though the paper is considered a primer intended to demystify quantum computing, I ended up, like I said, with questions and some takeaways for those who are still watching this at this point. I feel like the major takeaway is revolved around using Google or ChatGPT to answer my questions after the fact and after this conversation. But here, let me go ahead and list it. The first thing, like the first takeaway after reading that paper, there are 3 key terms that the paper identifies and provides a glimpse into its meaning. While some of it makes sense, I definitely need additional clarity into how it applies to the financial industry. If you hadn't read the paper, here are the terms that I'm mentioning: superposition, entanglement, and interference. So please look those up if you have a chance to. And I'm going to touch on one, because one of the definitions for entanglement, it sounds like data can be read or observed at any physical location, no matter the distance. And to me, the question is, does that mean it could also be manipulated from anywhere in the world? Like, we can read it from anywhere in the world. If it can be manipulated anywhere in the world, that is truly alarming for me, because this is totally different when hackers used to hack the signal inside somebody's cables, those physical cables, and now they're hacking, Wi-Fi signals and whatnot. But now it sounds like it can be hacked potentially anywhere in the world. That could be a dumb question, but that's just from a quantum novice outside looking in. Additionally, another takeaway is that there are several other resources that are referred to in that white paper. And again, I chose not to go through those papers. I wanted to come in as purely as a novice, right? And one of them mentions or refers to NIST and its standards. So to me, the surprising thing is that NIST has, and I'm using quotations here, quantum safe cryptographic algorithms. So as of right now, it's really interesting that they have quantum safe cryptographic algorithms when Y2K hasn't yet come. So that's kind of one thing that I would pay attention to is, yeah, we can tell financial institutions and technology companies to prepare for it or to closely examine where the data is encrypted, whether at rest or in transit, but is it really going to protect them when Y2Q comes? I'm a bit skeptical on that.
So, oh, you got more. Go ahead.
I do. So I understand at its core that quantum is going to bring massive computing power to everyone, including the industry, which to me means that you can compute / decrypt things quickly instead of years, minutes, right? That's great. But I also feel like the current problem in the industry today, especially for fraud prevention use cases, is that the data is so disintermediated. It doesn't matter how fast you can analyze it, you still don't have all the information necessary to make the most insightful decisions. With that said, there is more to gain for a fraudster than there is for a solitary financial institution to protect its data. And with that said, the white paper references itself, which is there's a potential of over $3 trillion in losses with quantum coming. And the last thing I'll touch on is second to last page is a table of like takeaways. And one of the things I wanted to point out is it's really good, things that you should consider, especially when it comes to strategy. But adding this to an organization's strategy is easier said than done. I think FIs are still trying to figure out how to use or even block the usage of AI as it stands today, let alone quantum, right? I think for right now, it's kind of like stay tuned and get involved with Nacha if you're interested. And so that's really the major takeaway for me is to just stay tuned and keep your eyes out for anything quantum related in the industry. The last bombshell that really resonated with me in that paper, and I'll use the quote word for word, the threat is today, it exists today, but the impact is the future.
Okay, now I want to go on record as saying you had 3 lasts in there. You said the last thing I'm going to say 3 times, but that's okay, Brian. We're going to let you get away with it. I actually think that the list of questions that you have is great. It means that the paper was a success. We took somebody who knew nothing about quantum and got them educated enough to say, hey, wait a minute, where do I need to be thinking about this? So we're not going to answer all Brian's questions, but John, do you want to pick one of Brian's questions and put him at ease a little bit?
Yeah, if I may, this is John. I'll go first. I want to correct one thing, or at least clarify one thing. The notion of entanglement in a quantum computing circle will not allow you to, analyze and crack a non-quantum device somewhere on the other side of the globe. It's really designed to operate within the confines of a quantum environment, right? So that threat does not exist. Right, just to handle the hacking question for 1 second so that everyone can, get back both feet on the ground. We are worried about quantum machines and their ability to crack modern cryptography based on its computational power and algorithmic science. But I also want the audience to understand that the algorithms that we need to protect the world from the threat of quantum already exist. They've been produced. And what really is in front of us in this industry is the willpower and the effort to make that transformation. And that's really the process that's in front of us. Yeah.
John, Brady, any thoughts, anything that you'd do to put Brian at ease?
It was interesting Brian, as you were talking about the fraud and potentially enabling fraudsters more. What I was thinking about is, that, if you look at the complexity in terms of solving fraud and detecting fraud, I think in the future, this will allow us to take more and more data sources that an FI has, and even combine data sources that multiple FIs have in ways that go beyond even what we have today, and be able to detect more and more and more fraud in real time. And so I think those are the applications I'm excited about going forward is, how can we take more and more data and shove it together and then use quantum computing to help us sort that out. And I'm not a quantum computing expert, but I just know there's complexity in things that we can't solve today that, I believe quantum computing will be able to help us solve in the future.
Yeah. Well, listen, this has been a great conversation. And for those of you listening, if we've piqued some questions, if you would love to get engaged in the conversation, go to alliance.nacha.org. The production of our documents is freely available. If you want to get involved, we'd love to have you as members. Anyone who is a member of the Alliance is welcome to join the project team. So John, Brian, John, thank you very much for spending your time, sharing your wisdom, and look forward to the future work on the project team.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for watching Buzzcasts, a program of NACHA's Payments Innovation Alliance. Buzzcasts are for informational purposes only, and its contents do not constitute legal or financial advice. Opinions expressed are not necessarily the views or positions held by NACHA. All rights reserved.